The easy part of any strategy is entering the trade. The hard part about trading is determining when to exit, how to defend your trade, and when to take profits. Let's begin this discussion by talking about profit targets first. Typically, when I'm trading an iron butterfly, I will look for between $50 to $100 per SPX contract as my target. I'll shoot for the $50 level if we have very low volatility. In other words, if we have a very small window of profitability in here, and we have very little tolerance for movement outside of that envelope, sometimes I'll just shoot for $50. And then what you can do is, if that's not enough, you can scale up in the number of contracts to be able to hit your daily profit goal. If we have more volatility, and this is typically where we get into some of the more corrective action, but not necessarily a true bear market, just enhanced volatility, then usually implied volatility is overstated from what actually occurs during the day. And it's quite easy to get that $100 per SPX contract in less than an hour. Now, sometimes these numbers are driven by my schedule. If I don't want to spend more than an hour trading, I just take my fair share, get in and get out. Sometimes that's worth $50. Sometimes that hour is worth $100 per contract. Again, I trade these with the attitude that time equals risk. The longer that you hold the position, the more likely is that price is going to move against you. So I want to get in, get my fair share, get out, don't get greedy. Now, if we're trading the spiders, you would think that this would be a direct correlation based on the 10-to-1 notional value. So this would be $5 to $10 per SPY contract. And what you're going to find is, even though we're in sort of a zero commission world, you're going to have some fees in there. You're going to have some level of commission per contract. And so making $5 to $10 per SPY contract is just not going to cut it. So we have to go a little bit harder with these things. So 10 to 20 per SPY contract makes more sense to be able to make sure that you're clearing your transactional costs. This is extremely important. As soon as you enter the trade, put a limit order in for your exit immediately. So don't play this game of like, well, let me just see how it goes, and I'll make up my mind based on what happens. That will lead you to regret. You'll understand that this is just a mechanical trade. You're just trying to get in there, get your fair share, and get out. I'm not going to play the ego game to second guess myself and say, man, I should have held in there. Because it's a matter of following your own strategy and your rules. Set up a limit order for your exit immediately after you enter the trade. Can't count the number of times where if you'd either forgotten or you delayed that, there might have been opportunity to get out in just a few minutes if you were there. Now, a narrow iron fly might take 3 hours to reach those targets. So a narrow iron fly is going to take longer because those long options are pretty close as well too, and they're decaying just almost as quickly as the short options are. So the whole thing is sort of running away from you. So it may take a little bit longer with a narrow iron fly. A wider iron fly is going to be a better experience for making faster profits. And typically we can reach these targets within an hour or so. So I want to bring this up one more time. That is your first goal. Try to get out with a profit from the trade. This is why I reduce my time exposure. Reduce your time exposure. The longer I hold the trade, the more likely it is to start moving again. And then that's where regret comes in. You start having to chase after this trade. Get out while the getting's good. Now we'll go into defense and exits. Couple of terms to go over here. First of all, we can use static risk management. Not adhere to any stops. So basically what we do is we just let this thing go. So here's our trade, and here is what it looks like. And here's the zero line for this. So there's the profitable zone up in here. This is the unprofitable zone down here. So what we can do is we can simply define this R level, the risk of the trade, whatever it ends up being, to make sure that is less than or equal to 2% of your account balance. You don't want any one trade to take more than 2% haircut of your account. Now, if we have a wider iron butterfly in place, this could be significant, right? This could be a significant loss in terms of just raw dollar numbers. If this is an iron butterfly with $1,000 max loss level to this, which is very common for us to see, 2% of that is a 50 grand account. So you'd have to have at least a $50,000 account to be able to size this. And basically just say, I don't have any stops. I'm just going to let the price wander around. And then if it hits my limit order, or if I determine that it's a good place to get out, then I can do that. So static risk management is really not the domain of the small account, especially with the SPX. Now, these numbers can get a lot smaller if you're using the spiders and using static risk management. So if you have a $100 maximum loss on the spiders, that is going to require at least a $5,000 account. So that's doable. And this is maybe something that you migrate into in time and start using static risk management. If you start to see too many stop outs on perfectly good trades, perhaps you need to consider this. You got to be okay with taking a full loss and be patient enough to allow the price to trade back into the profitable range to take your profits. There is intraday volatility, and it's a reality. And anything that you do which is mechanically stop based is going to introduce stops into your trading. So let the numbers tell you which approach that you should take. But I would say most people should start with using active risk management. This is actively managing risk by adhering to a stop level. But please do not use market stops on your spread. So this is defining, okay, the most I want to lose on this trade is X amount of dollars. And then basically what you're doing is you're putting in a closing stop order for that trade with your broker. Well, guess what? Stops are market orders, and the market for that spread could be anything at any given second. This will ensure you being stopped out for seemingly no reason. I've seen it happen so many times before, and every broker that I know of tries to dissuade their users from using this tool. Now, if you want to, you can use conditional stops. This might be a slightly better approach towards this. So in other words, and we'll get to these levels in a minute, but when the price comes down to a specific stop level that you've defined, perhaps it's, say, here, that is going to correlate to an actual price level. You can use a conditional stop saying, if the price hits this level, then get me out. Well, guess what? It's still going to be a market order. Now, you might be able to set it up as a stop limit order. So in other words, when that price gets hit, don't pay any more than this to get me out of the trade. But you're not going to know what that level is ahead of time. So I do prefer mental stops so that I can actively work the order. So if it hits my level, if it's time for me to retire the trade and get out of it, then I will be there. And this is why I'm always saying that, look, zero DTE trades are not these trades where you can just lay in a hammock somewhere outside in the beach and say, how's it going? No, you have to actively manage these things. Again, your goal is to get in, get out with your fair share in the smallest period of time possible. And you will need to be actively managing these to do that. Now, these are not the only ways that you can do this. There's several other ways out there floating around on the internet that will tell you how to do this. But here are two ways that you can start with if you're looking for something very objective in terms of identifying these stop points for the iron butterfly. Here is one of the iron butterflies that we set up before. This is the 30-point wide iron butterfly. The expected move was 25 points. So let's go ahead and mark that here. The expected move equals 25. And our width equals 30. So the width is 30 on these wings between the center strike of 95. And as we showed before, we have wings set out at 25 on the calls and 65 on the puts with a center strike of 95. All right, two ways to do this. Very simple. First way that you can use is just looking for the break-even point on the analyzer. This is going to require you to have some type of analyzer and understand where the break-even points are for expiration. The expiration break-even points should be clearly defined for any iron butterfly. Now notice that there is a slight negative skew to this. So when I say this, that the profit peak of the real-time P&L is always typically going to be slightly below the midpoint of the iron butterfly. This is because of volatility skew. This is because the fact that puts are more expensive than calls. So what you'll notice, regardless of the stop method that we pick here, is that the stops for the downside movements are going to be a little bit less than any stop that we pick on the upside movements. Now, to some degree, that's going to depend on time of day and how volatility fluctuates. But this is the first method is just the break-even expiration. So I'll just put this break-even expiration is one way to define ahead of time to tell yourself, okay, if the price gets down to this level or up to this level, and you should be able to determine what this is, and you can even place this as an alert on your chart to be emailed or SMS'd and be notified when that level is hit so that you can do something about it. Now, the second way that I like to use is using the actual expected move. Remember that the expected move of this was plus minus 25. So what I can do is simply go down here and use the expected move levels, which in this case is going to be the center price plus minus 25. So this is going to be right here. So right here is going to be one stop, and the plus 25 is going to be up here at 20. So these are a little bit looser in terms of stops. These are a little bit less conservative. So the break-even expiration is always going to be a more conservative, more constrictive stop loss. The expected move is going to be a little bit looser in terms of stops. So this will keep you into a good trade if the price decides to come down here and return back into the range. That'll happen plenty of times. But if you step into a trend day, then the break-even expiration will be more of a savior to your capital. So what do you do if one of these stops is hit? Basically, you just get out of the entire trade. You put a closing order in for it. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to clear your limit order and resubmit it with what the current midpoint is or slightly better than that to be able to get out of the trade. Now, the last comment that I will say about risk managing an iron butterfly is that a good offense is sometimes your best defense. A good offense is sometimes your best defense. So ensuring that you've done as good a job as possible of giving yourself a good shot that the price is going to be range bound. If you step in front of a trend day, like one of these days where it's just a trend day, there is no amount of options magic that you can do to turn a losing trade into a winning trade without taking way too much risk. So don't listen to those people that say, I can take any losing trade and turn it into a winner. That is puffery. There's no such thing that exists like that unless you take way too much risk on the other side of the trade. So don't listen to that. Just be simple, be very effective in terms of how you do this. A good offense is your best defense by making sure that you pick the days that appear to be range bound. Do the best job you can to qualify these as being range bound. And then you'll have to do very little actual active risk management of closing down trades that you don't belong in being in. Now, the last comment that I'm going to make on the iron butterfly is don't let a winner turn into a loser, right? So watch, if you have an analyzer, and I really recommend that you find some way to get an analyzer so that you can watch these things in real time. Because what I can do is I can see what the slope is of the real-time profit and loss. So I'm going to kind of artificially change this so that it's showing a profit on here by reducing the volatility. But this is pole position right there. This is where things are going really good. And if the price is just hanging out in this area, then you've got a very strong hand. Never let that turn into a loser by holding it for too long. Coincidentally, if you start to see the price slipping down this slope, then just simply get out, because it's not going to get any better. What you'll have to do is you'll have to wait a lot longer for the price. If it's moved outside of the profit peak, you'll have to wait that much longer just to reclaim what you just had a few minutes ago. So if you're in strong hand position, then sell into strength. Find ways to get out of the trade. Never let a winning trade turn into a loser because you're afraid to let it go, or, oh man, I just had a great profit a few minutes ago and now it's not, so I'm hoping that the price is going to pull back again. Don't play that game. If you've got a strong hand, then look for ways to get out of the trade while you have a strong hand. A weak hand usually doesn't get that much stronger on you.